love and honor so much, Danny Roth. Daniel is responsible for bringing Marianne, and we are so grateful for both of you for being here. And again, thank you guys for being here, and off to Danny.
Thanks, Emily. I feel so honored to introduce you to a woman who's been a spiritual teacher for over 35 years, teaching A Course in Miracles. When my cousin, who studies and teaches A Course in Miracles, asked me if her friend could stay at my place in New York, of course I said yes when she was visiting town. And when she came, she was so excited that Marianne was speaking. And 2 years later, a friend of mine who lives in the Bay Area, a millennial who goes to Burning Man, said, "I can't believe Marianne Williamson might be running for president." And at that point, I felt my childhood self and my idealistic Burning Man going self pulled in. And I sent Marianne an email, and we got on the phone. And she asked me, "What is it in you that's having you reach out to me?" And I said, "I want to see you win. I want to see you win." She said, "Well, I'm glad you don't just want to see me elevate the conversation." Because that's what she's been doing for so long. And yeah. Marianne has written 14 books, 4 of which have been New York Times bestsellers. Deepak Chopra called Marianne's work, A Return to Love, a classic. Deepak Chopra called it a classic. Please help me give a warm welcome to a woman who, with your help, with your consciousness, with our collective consciousness, could become the first woman president. Marianne Williamson!
To be here. This is such a cool room in so many ways. Thank you. I'll get right into it and talk to you about the conversation that I think we all know we need to be having in this country. And that is that American politics doesn't get to the heart of the matter. And for those of us who either personally or professionally over the last few years, and some of us over the last few decades, have become deeply aware that in any situation, in any relationship, it could be a relationship with yourself, as in recovery or therapy or spiritual growth, a relationship with another person, an intimate partner, somebody you're working with, no matter what it is, if you don't get down and you don't get real, and you don't get brutally honest, and you don't dive into what's really happening in a situation, and you don't look deeply at the dynamics and the cross currents between people and the gaps between us and our truth, or us and somebody else's truth, or us and our own integrity, then things don't heal, things don't really move, things don't really break through into a better place. And politics is not a conversation where that kind of authentic, real, honest, beautiful, painful, real stuff happens. And because of that, many of us have been like, whatever, and became chronically disengaged from politics for that very reason. We wanted real, we wanted deep, we wanted meaningful, and politics wasn't that. And sometimes we would even tell ourselves, well, the change isn't going to come from there, which if ever there's an essence of a privileged conversation, it's to say, well, change isn't going to come from there. Yeah, maybe the change doesn't come from there for you, but the damage is coming from there for millions of other people. So now there's been an awakening, I think, where everyone realizes, everyone at any level of consciousness realizes, this is going too far. Because the lack of wisdom and the disconnection from heart and the disconnection from what we would see as any kind of deep level truth within American politics, given that American politics, given that we are the most powerful country in the world, given the billions of dollars that are wielded by that vessel, and given the extraordinary technological power, the extraordinary destructive power that can be wielded by that vessel is such that it represents a peril. It represents a peril to our democracy. It represents a peril already to the lives of millions and millions of people. And it represents a peril to the future, not only of our country, but possibly to the world. Now, the good news is, as we all know, that once you do get real, and once you do get honest, and once you do get fiercely and brutally self-aware, and recognize where the gaps are between you and who you say you are, get clear about where you're not being the person that maybe you should be, admit your character defects, atone for your mistakes, make amends where you can, and really commit to change and growth, the universe is merciful, miracles happen. So it's not like solutions aren't available, but miraculous solutions and breakthroughs do not come from superficial conversation. And so if all we're going to have in American politics is a better version of the superficial conversation, a better version of the same old, when the same old is a mindset that got us into this ditch. And the idea that that mindset in any form will get us out of this ditch is absurd. Now, what about those who know better? Those of us who know better are being asked to support those who represent a better version of the same old. And it's not like any of these people are bad people. I'm running for president with apparently 1,736 other people running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency. And they're all good people, and they're all smart people. But the way the status quo protects and perpetuates itself is by co-opting disruptive language. And so there are some new cool words that have been added to the conversation. Apparently even the words like morality and love have tested well in focus groups. And so there are a lot of new words and concepts that make it all seem so cool, pasted on to the old conversation. One major political party is bought and sold by the most corrupt mentality you could possibly imagine. A very undemocratic, anti-American worldview, which is basically a reversion to the same aristocracy that we repudiated in 1776. A situation where a small group of people are deemed entitled. And a lot of people would say, what are we complaining about? We're one of them. But people of conscience aren't happy with the fact that we made it into the club. The problem in America isn't that some people can get rich, some people can do well. That's a beautiful thing. The problem in America is that not enough people can. And anybody who's raised your little turtle knows that that is not sustainable. And it's not what America is. But then there's another major political party which hasn't been bought and sold by the new veiled aristocratic vision of America, by which only a few people have an easy enough time having health insurance, an easy enough time getting educated, an easy enough time making any kind of wealth for ourselves. The other major political party takes an attitude towards all that, which is a little bit like just so pained about the whole thing, just wringing its hands. It's really sad. You really feel all that pain. But even that major political party, for the most part, addresses the pain caused on the periphery. But it too will not challenge the underlying forces that make all that pain inevitable. And you know, if you're a child and you are abused by your father, when you grow up and you go to therapy, the first person you experience anger towards is the mother who stood in the hall and let that happen. We can't let this happen, or of course we can let it happen. It's definitely an option to let this happen. But if we think about it even for a moment, it's really sad if we let this happen. So I want to talk to you tonight about what another option would be. What it would mean for us to simply get real. And face the facts. It's not that hard. It's not that mysterious what's happened here. It's not even that complicated. But it's horrifying. But when do we heal in life? When we don't face the horror. Oh my God, how I behaved. Well, you gotta face it. Oh my God, what actually happened here? Well, you're gonna have to face it. And once you do face it, on the other side of that pain, it's all the light we could possibly want. In fact, on the other side of being real and authentic and fiercely honest with ourselves, we're better than ever. We have greater gravitas and greater humility, greater magnetism. We become better people, and we can become a better country. But only if we do this. And I believe a president in the 21st century should be a president who not only knows this, but is willing to say it. And everything that I'm saying on the campaign trail, I'm saying it's very interesting to me. Because everything that I'm talking about, every other Democratic candidate knows it too. But they won't name it. And people will ask themselves, why do you think that is? We have millions of American children, who go to school every day in schools that don't even meet safety standards, minimum safety standards, some of which don't even have working toilets, and which do not have classrooms filled with the school supplies adequate to teach a child how to read. Now, a child, if that child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of their graduating from high school are drastically diminished, and the chances of their incarceration are drastically increased. Millions of these children live in what's called America's domestic war zones, where psychologists say that the of a veteran returning from Afghanistan or Iraq is no more severe than the PTSD experienced by these children, except in a returning veteran, it's post-traumatic stress. For these children, it's present traumatic stress. It is triggered and re-triggered every day. So great is the violence in their homes, in their schools, in their communities, and on their streets. This is your humanitarian crisis. This is a national emergency. And if one person neglects a child that they know is in trouble, we call that person unethical at best and criminal at worst. So what do we call a country that is neglecting these children? What do we call us? Now, these kids aren't old enough to vote, so they don't represent a constituency. And they're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. So in a situation such as ours today, where, and we know this, our government has become little more than a system of legalized bribery, where since Citizens United, Supreme Court decision, but it started even before then, the nefarious influence of dark money by which corporate money flows into the halls of Congress and White House every day. What possible chance do these children have to compete with the clout of those corporate forces? So what do? We simply normalize their despair. Now, if you're going to heal as a person, you kind of have to recognize the places you're not really very nice. You have to recognize the places where you might talk all this love stuff, but you're not living it. And this country should have a conversation. If we're going to change our social contract, we should at least discuss it. Because our social contract is based on the Declaration of Independence, that God gave all men unalienable rights to life and to liberty and to the pursuit of happiness, and that the government is instituted to secure those rights. Now, those children are full-on citizens of the United States. Where is their right to pursue happiness? So if we're just going to, forget that, could we have a conversation about that? And if we're not going to be a country anymore that honors on any level Lincoln's idea that a government of the people and by the people and for the people would not perish from the earth. If we're going to let it perish, could we have a conversation about that? Because it's perishing. We're not a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We're a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, for a few of the people. A government of the corporations, by a few of corporations, and for a few of corporations. And every one of us in here is subtly and insidiously enrolled in the idea that, what are you complaining about? You're fine. That's how a veiled aristocracy works. So those of us who should be the first to say, no, this should stop now, are too often the people who are subtly and insidiously enrolled. I don't think the average American is a racist. I don't, actually. But I think the average American is undereducated about the history of race in this country, particularly since the Civil War. So, if you will, allow me to be a little bit of an American history teacher here for just a couple of minutes. At the end of the Civil War, in 1865, and I remind you that slaves were first brought over to this country in 1619. The Civil War was over in 1865, and at that time there were anywhere between 4 and 5 million slaves. Now, everything I'm about to say I think would have been different had Abraham Lincoln lived, but he didn't. Everything I'm about to say I think would have been different had Martin Luther King lived too, but he didn't. At the end of the Civil War, General Tecumseh Sherman promised every former slave, a family of 4, something we've all heard, 40 acres and a mule. Now, let's think about this for a moment. As Martin Luther King would say 100 years later, they were free, but what were they free to? I think that everybody in this room would agree that if you had been kicking someone to the ground, or particularly if you've been kicking them to the ground for like 2.5 centuries, then you have a moral responsibility to do 2 things. Number 1, stop kicking, but number 2, say, here, let me help you get back up. We stopped kicking. In 1865, from 1865 to 1877, federal troops were stationed in the American South to ensure that slavery as an institution would not be reinstated. And during that time, interestingly enough, black people, former slaves, were elected to Congress and state houses, and everything could have gone quite well. However, once the federal troops left, and today we have a psychological understanding that wasn't present then. People weren't thinking this way then. Remember, the southern states didn't end slavery because they wanted to. They ended slavery because they lost the war. So in addition to the kind of mentality you'd have to own a slave to begin with, you have the hatred and the rage against that population over having lost not only your slaves, but your entire way of life. So, as soon as the federal troops left, the revenge and the hatred came out full force. Southern legislatures passed what were called the Black Code Laws. And the Black Code Laws were to ensure subpar political and economic and social opportunities for former slaves, blacks in America, and their descendants. That's why you had, at that time, what was called the Great Migration. And the Great Migration was that by which many black people fled the South, going to cities like Detroit, Cleveland, etc., to see if they could get work. And many times found racial prejudice even where they weren't trying to escape the minority. So with the Black Code Laws began a century of what we would call today domestic terrorism. The Ku Klux Klan, lynchings, by which blacks were just randomly hanged, white people who would help them randomly hanged. And by the year 1900, you had full-on white supremacy and segregation in the American South. This horror of domestic terrorism was not fundamentally challenged till Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. So you have 2.5 centuries of slavery followed by another 100 years of this institutionalized violence. Now, I don't want to minimize the struggles or the successes or the sacrifices of any of our ancestors, black or white, because extraordinary things happened with the Civil Rights Movement. But our generation needs to recognize what has been achieved and what has still not yet been achieved. So there were 2 major pieces of legislation, 1964 and 1965. 1964 was the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And with the Civil Rights Act, the mechanisms, the external mechanisms of segregation were dismantled. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, which would ensure free and equal voting rights to blacks in America. And by the way, some of you might not realize that in 2013, the John Roberts-led Supreme Court started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, which is why we have all these voter suppression efforts all over the country, and we know who they're aimed at. So in many ways, so then what happened? So let's talk about what was achieved. What was achieved was dismantling of segregation. Check. Very good. No small thing. What was achieved was Voting Rights Act, voting equality. Check. Very good, although now, even now, compromised. What was never achieved, and this is why I say that I think if Martin Luther King had lived, the crusade would have continued, and that is economic restitution. So the gap that existed, when you free a people from 2.5 centuries of slavery, the gap, the obvious gap, particularly given the fact that it was met by these black code laws, the gap was never closed. We have gotten to the point where no matter who you are, no matter what your color is, if you're a genius in America, you can make it. That's beautiful, because decades ago, even that wasn't true. But the fact that a Tyler Perry or Magic Johnson can make it does not mean social justice has been achieved. So, since World War II, Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations for slavery. That doesn't mean they can make the Holocaust not have happened. But that $89 billion of reparations has gone far towards reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Germany and the rest of Europe. And I'm sure some of you have been to Europe, know Germans, know young Germans. It's amazing if you experience young Germans today versus even 25 years ago. I can tell you from my own experience, there's a level of karmic toxicity that you can tell is flushed out. It wasn't even that way even 25 years ago. Why? Because their ancestors did the right thing. That war was over in 1945. The Civil War was over in 1865, and we are still handing generation to generation this toxicity based on the fact that we have not fully reconciled. It is time. We will never be able to make slavery not have happened. We will never be able to have made certain things that occurred not have occurred. But it is time for us to take the next step as a gift to our children. It's a gift to the next generation. It is time to pay reparations for slavery. I want to say something because I want to say something that I think some of you might find surprising. Many of my friends who are black have said, yeah, but white Americans would never go for that. And I just want to say something here. I have been, before early primary states in American presidential campaign season, are New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, and Nevada. And I swear to you, I think you're supposed to swear with your right hand, I swear to you, every time, because Iowa is one of the whitest states in America, New Hampshire is one of the whitest states in America. Every time I have said what I have just said in Iowa, in New Hampshire, even among white audiences in South Carolina and in Nevada, it has brought applause. And what does that tell you? It tells you that we're good people. Americans are not stupid. The problem is not that Americans are dumb. And it's not that Americans aren't decent. It's not that Americans aren't good. It's that our goodness is not currently being channeled to our political process. And so I'm running for president in order to place an option before the American people. The only antidote to the fact that we've done so many wrong things is to do good things now. The era of small random acts of kindness, that's not enough. We need huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. We got to where we are because of domestic and international policies that are really wrong. And we will get out of this ditch by domestic and international policies that are really right, that are really good. And the last issue I want to mention to you, because it's huge, is our national defense strategy. So just like our economic system has nothing to do with planning economic vibrancy in 10 years. Nothing. It's all about leeching from the future in the present, like I said, to a small group of corporate forces and the people that are enrolled there and made rich there. Like I said, the problem is, it is a difference between wealth and aristocracy. Wealth is good. It's great that people can make money. Aristocracy is different than wealth. Aristocracy is when your entire governmental system is set up in such a way as to make it easier for people who have a lot of money to make more money and harder to make people who have none to make even enough to survive easily. That's a difference. I believe in capitalism with a conscience. When I was a child, the social contract was such that the corporation was expected to have a sense of ethical and moral responsibility that was greater than just its fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders. It was expected that it had an ethical responsibility to the workers and an ethical responsibility to the environment and an ethical responsibility to the environment. And instead, for the last 40 years, we have forged an economic system by which market forces, untethered to any kind of ethical consideration whatsoever, has become the primary organizing principle of our entire society. It has hijacked our entire value system. And so because of this, we don't fight climate change anywhere nearly the way we should, because of the chemical companies and the oil companies. We don't have health care because of the big pharmaceutical companies and the health insurance companies. And our national defense policy is driven almost primarily, almost solely, by an agenda based on short-term profits for military industrial contractors rather than by any efforts to actually wage peace. So just as our economic policy has nothing to do with planning economic vibrancy in 10 years, because if you wanted that, what you would do is take better care of your 10-year-olds today. So it is also true that our national defense policy has absolutely nothing to do with waging peace. You wage peace not by just increasing short-term profits for Boeing or Raytheon and Northrop Grumman. You wage peace, and we know that these things are true. There's nothing mysterious here. These sociological factors are evidence that anyone agrees on. You increase economic opportunities for women. You increase educational opportunities for children. You reduce violence against women, and you ameliorate unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. Because when those four factors are present, violence is reduced, conflict is reduced, and war is less likely. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk, because desperate people do desperate things. And desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. And that's true if it's a corner of the United States where they're more vulnerable to gang membership, or a corner of the city somewhere, the world somewhere else, where they are more vulnerable to terrorist organizations, or spread around this country and more vulnerable to Donald Trump. And the fact that the Republicans were gobsmacked by Donald Trump, and the fact that the Democratic establishment was gobsmacked by Bernie Sanders, is an example of how blind they both are. Because when you do not factor in human despair and human desperation and economic anxiety into your understanding of what drives people and what makes people act the way they act, then you have no vision. We need a political visionary more than we need a political mechanic right now. And the fact that you have a really good car mechanic doesn't necessarily mean that you would ask that mechanic to find you the road on the map that will lead you to San Antonio. And Franklin Roosevelt said the main role of the presidency is moral leadership, not administrative factors. So I, like I'm sure most of you in this room, have always felt that the ultimate solution is love. The ultimate salvation of the world is not politics. The ultimate salvation of the world is love. But I'm reminded of a line I once heard from Deepak Chopra. By the way, he loved that book just because he was mentioning it. That's where he loved it. It was early on in his career, nobody even heard of who he was. Deepak Chopra once said, if I want to be healthy, if I want to cultivate health, I want to go Ayurvedic. But if I'm in a major car accident, someone please get me to a Western hospital emergency room immediately. What I'm here to tell you is that we are in a major car accident. We cannot avoid politics if we don't have time to just say, well, we'll all become more loving. Because there is no tradition, this is my field. There is no religious or spiritual tradition of any kind that gives anyone a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. And nothing is more insidious and nothing is more incorrect than to claim that just because you get to manifest your dreams, that somehow that's the spiritual mountaintop. The spiritual mountaintop is not that you get to manifest your goals. Adolf Hitler manifests his goals. Your manifesting your goals is not the spiritual mountaintop. The spiritual mountaintop is that love gets to manifest through you. And the love that will save the world is not just the personal love. It can't just be love for our children. It's got to be love for children on the other side of town also. It's got to be children on the other side of the world also. It can't just be that we take care of our home. It's got to be that the entire world is seen as our home. And it can't just be, oh, I really support you. It's not based on anything. People who are members of any kind of higher consciousness pursuit are the last people who should be standing on the periphery. The last people. We should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. Because if you know what changes one life or one system, you're the one who knows how to change the world. And living a meaningful life is not a popularity contest. And I think that's particularly an issue for the women here. Because on a certain level, if you're going to say the most meaningful things, you will not get applause from everyone. But, and I think I might have mentioned it before about certain words, one of the ways that the status quo protects and perpetuates itself is to co-opt disruptive language. If I hear one more person whose life is the opposite of disruption, except on any level other than cosmetic, actually pretend to themselves that they are a disruptor, I don't know if I could laugh any louder. We need to take the words we're already involved in and get more serious about them. We need to add some grit to our grace. We need to add some adulthood and serious intellectual sophistication to some of the things that so many of us already believe in. The work is not just in rooms like this. Rooms like this I see as the battery charge, but truth is a kind of time-release capsule. You know, we heal one aha at a time. So the issue is what happens when we leave here. And I just want to leave you with one little thing. Because that little thing is something which I think, if you allow it to stay with you, contains all the poison. And it's our job to eat the poison. That's what Kali does. She eats it. The B-21 Raider is an airplane that our Air Force has bought 100 of them. The B-21 Raider, each one costs $550 million. And each one carries both conventional and nuclear weapons. Now, would you just take a moment, please? Why do we need 100 airplanes that drop nuclear bombs? You think some political expert knows more than you do? You think some military expert knows the answer better than you do? No, the founder said it's our common sense and our wisdom which would run this country. So I'm asking you tell me, why we need 100 airplanes at $550 million each that carry both conventional and nuclear weapons? Because you drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. You drop 10 of those, it's over for humanity on this planet for at least, they say, 250 or 300,000 years. And every nuclear bomb that exists on the planet today makes the bombs that dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima look like pinpricks. Think what those $550 million could do to ameliorate unnecessary human suffering. Think what that $500 million in even one of those airplanes could do to help those chronically traumatized children. Or to help those 12,000 children who starve every day on this planet. Your karmic fingerprints are on that. You're an American. And if you're an American, you have rights, but you also have responsibilities. And these are karmic. And a nation gets karmic blowback just like an individual does. If you think on the level of your individual life that it's all coming back to you, and what you give to others you will get back, and what you withhold from others you will be withheld from you, that works collectively as well. The woman I know who died on one of the planes, 9/11, was one of the sweetest, most wonderful people I've ever met. And she was definitely one of the people that you want the world to know, this is the face of the American, because everybody in the world would love her. But she was on that plane. So this is not a time where we can spend much longer pondering these things. I know it's an urgency, and I know it's a crisis, and I know that a crisis is never convenient. And I know it's traumatizing, but American women are not porcelain dolls. You think the people who walked across that bridge at Selma were not traumatized? They didn't know if they were going to bring out the dogs or bring out the hoses or even bring out the bullets. Of course they were traumatized, but they walked. You think those women suffragettes who were thrown in prison because they were marching for suffrage, and because the conditions were so terrible they went on a hunger strike, so then the guards put these metal contraptions around their necks and force-fed them? You think they weren't traumatized and stressed and anxious? We have too many men in this society who've been acting like little boys, and too many women who've been acting like little girls. It's our time. And we need to do more than back up from the cliff. That's what your traditional political conversation will do. We know we need to win. We know we need to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. But anybody who thinks that it's as simple as defeating Donald Trump in 2020 is naive. Is naive about the nature of the opponent here. And the forces that are behind him, of the veiled aristocracy, it's fine if you defeat him. They'll be to them because they'll so be back in 22 and they'll so be back in 24. No, we have a much bigger job to do here. He is speaking to a primal aspect of the human consciousness. Fear that is a primal aspect of human consciousness. And nice rational analysis will not override that. The only way to defeat dog whistles is to drown them out with angel voices, with voices of our angel, of the better angels of our nature. You know, in the old days, when Abraham Lincoln talked about the angels of our better nature, I don't think he was thinking he was being metaphorical. Psychology didn't exist yet. So in those days, if you talked about things which today we would call racism or bigotry or anti-Semitism or homophobia or Islamophobia or xenophobia, you know what they would have called those things? Demons. And if you talked about what we would think of as love and compassion and tolerance and justice and brotherhood and mercy, you know what they would have called those things? Angels. And maybe they were smarter than we even knew. So it's time for all of us to rise up. Time for all of us to co-create what Lincoln would call a new birth of freedom. And I've always assumed that even though Susan B. Anthony didn't live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment, because she gave her entire life to the cause of women being able to vote, I've always felt like every time a woman votes in this country, that her soul, wherever it is, must tingle. So if we rise to the occasion now, we just rise up and ask in our own way to be used by love at this extraordinary time in history. I'm not saying that we will achieve all that we wish to achieve in our lifetime, but it does mean from a Buddhist perspective that we will die a whole lot happier. And it means that when these things are achieved, wherever we are, our souls will tingle. This is what I'm talking about in my campaign for the presidency. I feel that my job is to place before the American people the option of another way. Where Trump has harnessed fear for political purposes, we can harness love for political purposes. We are good people. We are decent people. We need to harness our decency. We need to strategize our love. The problem is not that more people hate than love in this country or in this world. The problem is that those who hate, hate with conviction. And they're strategized, and they're organized, and they're effective. We need to become as convicted behind our love as some people are behind our hate. And we need to take it beyond just ourselves. We need to love very deeply right now. And we need to really, really pray very hard right now. And we need to kick ass. You will let me President of the United States, I promise you. We will. I really appreciate that. And you can talk about anything you want to talk about. You can ask me anything you want to bring up, whatever you want, and I will, to the best of my ability, respond appropriately. Oh, yes, ma'am.
If you could only do one thing to make change, what would it be first?
Well, I don't, you know, it's not, when Einstein said the problems of the world will not be solved on the level of thinking that we were at when we created them. If you just do something, look at Obama, look at all the things he did, which as soon as Trump got in were undone. So it's really not just a matter of what you do, it's a matter of who you are. What I'm offering is a certain consciousness that would be the consciousness of the president sitting behind that desk. Many of the things I would do are the same things Bernie Sanders would do, or the same things Elizabeth Warren would do. I can tell you some of the things I would do. First thing I would do is call the leaders of the biggest nations in Europe and say, we're back! And all the things that go along with that, obviously. One of the things I would do is call the leaders of the Palestinian Authority and Israel almost immediately. And I would work very hard, and I think I would be successful at this, because it is the truth of my heart, to have an understanding of the concerns of the human rights of the Palestinians that is equal and in full and equal measure to my concern for the appropriate needs of Israel. What I would do has to do with the fact that our entire economic system, I would get rid of a lot of the pinstripe suits, very nice, I'm sure, people who have formed the great economic councils of the United States, but whom, in all honesty, while they are preparing our economy, send their own kids to private schools for good reason. They can retire now or go work elsewhere, and our economic councils will be filled with elementary school teachers, child psychologists, and other experts in the fields of early education. And I will make sure that we have a cabinet-level U.S. Department of Children and Youth. I will appoint, as head of our EPA, a world-class environmentalist. No people who are advocates for chemical companies or big ag or fossil fuel companies will any longer be working at the EPA, but the EPA will become this unbelievable, vibrant and vigorous collection of the best environmental scientists and sustainability experts anywhere in the world. I will make sure that our Secretary of State is not, as our person was in this administration, an ex-CEO of Exxon, but rather will be a world-class humanitarian and diplomat, and the entire defense strategy of the United States will be a partnership, an equal partnership with the efforts to prepare for war, adequately prepare for war if necessary, and wage peace. And that will also include not only the international efforts that are promulgated by the State Department, but also a U.S. Department of Peace to deal with domestic issues, wraparound services for these traumatized children, anti-trauma, anti-bullying, restorative justice, so many ways, conflict resolution. There are so many ways in every single area, whether it has to do with climate change, whether it has to do with education, whether it has to do with any single issue. We have the geniuses here. We have the creative thinkers. I'm sure some of them are in this room. It's not like we lack the very cool kind of creative thinking, cutting edge thinking that could forge the way into an amazing 21st century. This is the problem both in this country and in the world, just like in Israel and Palestine. You have people there doing the heart-centered work of real peace creation, but that's not who's being given the resources, either there or here. In this presidency, the way would be open for the best, most creative thinking of the American people, as opposed to just the economic benefits of a few corporate entities who would know that, and some of them do, some of the great corporate chieftains in the United States do know that the situation that we're in is unsustainable. This is not about, not every rich person is greedy, not every poor person is noble and pure. This isn't about individuals, this is about systems. There's an Italian industrialist who's famous for having said, if we want things to stay the same, some things are going to have to change around here. And there are some very powerful capitalist leaders in this country who do know that. They would find themselves very welcome in my White House because I would want to work with them. And the other guys would know that I'm nice at dinner, but their time is over. There's no reason. Everything that has happened, none of this was mysterious. We got into this ditch through systematic efforts of subsidies to the very, very wealthiest corporations, tax breaks for the very, very wealthiest corporations. Can you tell me why we're paying subsidies to the oil industry, which has billions of dollars beyond any kind of wealth that has ever been accumulated in the world, and we're subsidizing them? Why do you think it was that the Boeing Max, as soon as that second plane went down, China immediately grounded it. The nations of Europe in the next few days immediately grounded it. Why do you think we were slow to get there? We were slow to get there because Boeing paid $15 million in lobbying this year alone. Because our FAA, rather than being the advocate that it should be, just like our EPA isn't an advocate for the health of our environment and the people who live here, so much as it's an advocate for short-term profits for oil companies and chemical companies, our FDA is not an advocate for our health. It's the advocate for the short-term profits of food companies, chemical companies, and big ag. They've taken all the power away from it. All it can do is politely suggest that something that might be poisoning you, basically, is taken off the shelves. And similarly, the FAA doesn't go first and foremost to advocate for your safety or mine, but first and foremost to advocate for Boeing. Now, the facts became so clear that they had to ground those parties. But it's not an accident that we were the last major country to ground it. Does that make sense? This is the level of our corruption. All we have to do is look at it. That's what I'm saying. All we have to do is look at it. But we have to look at it, how deep that corruption is. Yes, ma'am.
Wait for the mic. Yeah, there you go.
So I'm British, otherwise I wish I could vote for you because I
Thank
would
you.
be.
Thank you. I bet you have some American friends.
Yeah, exactly, don't worry, I'm telling everybody. My question is, what do you anticipate the biggest challenge will be, the challenge you'll face in the next kind of like 18 months, especially in regards to, obviously we're the choir, we are so on board with all your thinking, but to, let's say, the Trump voters who are they're so kind of affirmed in their opinions, like what's your strategy for turning them?
So there are people who have almost like a cult-like dedication to the president. They are not going to vote for any Democrat, so there's no point in even trying to figure out anything about that. They're going to vote for the president. They, however, are not the ones who made this happen. That alone would not have made this happen. This happened also because of the people who voted for him, who I do believe are at least somewhat disturbed and would be open to the presentation of an alternative vision for what's possible. But I think it's worth remembering that many of those people, for reasons that I don't think any of us quite understand, are more afraid of left-wing anger than of right-wing anger. So if all we do is approach this with anger, hello, they're not going to vote for us. So this idea, we need somebody tough enough to beat him, it's almost childish. We need someone to make him appear irrelevant. I don't feel that the American people need me to tell them who Trump is. The American people don't need me to remind them what he's done. The American people need us to create a vision so compelling that they simply go that way. And I'll tell you something, a lot of Republicans like the fact that I talk about moral values and spiritual values. And a lot of people, not everybody out there is a political junkie. And a lot of people who, in terms of issues, probably should be agreeing with those of us who disagree with the president, feel that their values and their morals are not affirmed. And with me, they feel that they are, actually. And then the other is to inspire the possibilities. We know how many people didn't vote in 2016. And we know how many people voted for a third-party candidate who might certainly rethink that decision this time. So the ones who are just really sold on Trump, hey, it's a free country, nobody owes it to you to agree with you, but don't waste any time there. They're not going to vote for you. But there are a lot of people who might vote for you, but they won't if all you do is make them feel shamed for having voted for him. Shame is an act of emotional violence. So if you voted for Trump, and all I do is tell you about how bad he is, I'm really telling you, you made this happen. That's the subtext. That won't make you want to vote for me. Ronald Reagan, one of the ways Ronald Reagan, most of you are too young to remember this, but one of the ways Ronald Reagan wielded such power is that every time somebody would disagree with him, this is what he'd say, there they go again. It was so disarming. When David defeated Goliath, the reason David was able to defeat Goliath was by hitting him in the third eye. And that's conscience. That's the one place Trump has no shame. He has no conscience. So you talk to people about conscience and how the nation should have a conscience. He doesn't know what to say to that. He does not know what the word means. It's really good. It's not really good. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious about, I love everything that you're doing right now.
Thank you.
I'm like, thank God. I was thinking that these candidates would come within 20 years, 10 years, because I'm like, America's not ready for this, but when I saw you running, I'm like, yes.
Thank you. We don't have 20 years.
No, I know.
Oh,
But,
God, personally in 20 years, but I mean the country.
So I'm so happy that you're doing
Yes.
this. It takes a lot of courage, I can't imagine. I'm curious about this tactical thing, which whatever, his just technical stuff, but it's something that really touches me deeply. And it's, what would you do with a situation like Venezuela right now?
Well, unfortunately, the United States has sacrificed its moral authority in Latin America. So in this particular case, we're right, but we've been wrong so many times that Latin American countries, for good reason, are like, you know what, we can do this without you, thank you. There are Latin American democracies that are on it. Maduro is not, by our standards, a good guy. And I would call the countries, the Latin American countries that are doing the most in terms of dealing with this situation, to our intelligence. I would actually be a president who listens to our intelligence agencies, and I would say to the Latin American, of course, the Latin American countries, democracies as well as Canada, and we all do have a stake in this. It is the Western Hemisphere, and I would say, how can we help? We would not be leading that effort, and I certainly would not be even entertaining the idea of military intervention, not even thinking about it. That's the last thing. But I would be very humble about it. I would be humble about it in terms of Latin American countries who recognize the problem that Maduro represents, recognize humanitarian efforts, and all efforts of the United States under their leadership in that sense. How can we help? That's what I would do. Yes.
So, to use the title of your book, I think that there's a lot of systems going on in America right now in which we need a return to love. We need a return to sanity, peace, and kindness and compassion. And two of the biggest systems that I see in America that need that return are the prison system and animal agriculture. Do you have thoughts on how we could return to love in these two systems?
Well, you know, there's a phrase, prison industrial complex, and it's true. Building prisons, private prisons, are immoral, and it has become one of the largest urban industries in the United States. That entire system should be dismantled, because what is created, it is created in a situation, as in so many, where billions of dollars are made on the backs of human suffering. Human suffering has become a profit center for certain industries. That right there is so immoral. So that you have prison lobbyists who actually lobby for harsher sentences because that would make more money for prison makers. But once again, it's a moral rot. It's a spiritual rot and dysfunction that underlies this corruption that creates so much dysfunction. So I am very much against the privatization of prisons. I recognize the racial disparity. I would have a Department of Justice which totally recognizes and seeks to dismantle a system by which there is such systemic racism in our criminal sentencing, and also the realization that so many people have today of the travesty of so many nonviolent drug offenders in our jails. We have people in America in prison for decades for marijuana. But we need to go further, I think, than just legalizing marijuana. We need to rethink the entire drug war. You know, one of the reasons that I think Republicans win sometimes more than Democrats is because more of them come from the private sector. Because in the private sector, the way you are as an entrepreneur is, okay, it's Wednesday, okay, you tried it on Monday, Tuesday wasn't working, Wednesday wasn't working, by Thursday, okay, this isn't working, we gotta change this by Monday. Politics sometimes just lumbers along, which is also why creative thinkers aren't interested in it. We gotta change this. So today, what is the point of trying to fight all these drugs coming in at the borders when all people have to do is order fentanyl from China over the internet? I mean, it's a different world. So there is so much rethinking for us to do in terms of drugs, so much rethinking for us to do in terms of economics. Speaking of economics, we have a situation where there's a profound tsunami, and I know you also asked about animal agriculture, so let's just go back to animal agriculture. There is a rising consciousness in the United States. In Iowa, they have this horrible situation called CAFOs. Oh, it's horrifying, where so many of the pigs are in the same place, and the smell is so. I mean, the reason it's changing is because the smell it permeating the entire state, and sometimes it has to get to the point where it's harming people or making people upset before they realize, well, that's because of what you're doing to the animals. So the entire issue of humane treatment of animals is becoming an issue which has to do with the entire way that agribusiness, it's not just what it's done to animals, it's what it's done to farmers. It's what it's done to this profound, and this is what happens when huge multinational conglomerates just burst through all of the fragile bonds of human civilization. So whether it has to do with our relationship to our land, whether it has to do with relationship to our food, whether it has to do with relationship of our animals, it's all of the same piece. And that's what I think is very, very important, is that we all understand that there's a poison, one poison underneath all this. There's a cancer underneath all these other cancers. So whether it has to do with reverence towards animals, or it has to do with reverence towards the land, whether it has to do with reverence towards the food, whether it has to do with reverence towards immigrants, whether it has to do with reverence towards the poor, whether it has to do with reverence towards the children, you will not display that reverence as long as you are making market forces untethered to any ethical consideration, your organizational bottom line, and as long as your country, your government is subservient to that system. Yes.
So what would you tell people that may say that running a campaign on love is naive?
I would say that they obviously have not read the issues section of my website. Marianne2020.com, by the way. There's nothing about my career, nothing really about my personhood, and nothing about my campaign, which is soft and fuzzy. There's a line in the Course in Miracles where it says, love restores reason, and not the other way around. I'm naive? Let me tell you what's naive. What's naive is thinking we can continue the way we're continuing and survive on this planet for another 100 years. What's naive? Yes, ma'am.
So what's the love strategy to shift corporate power? How do we shift the corporate undertone of every system in our nation? And really, what are your plans there? What are your tactical, strategical thoughts? And how do we step into that with you in this? Because it does feel like that's the systemic power, and that's what, as entrepreneurs in this room, we're done with it.
What we have done in the past, the narrative of American history, is that we have always pushed back against unbridled corporate power, unbridled capitalism when capitalism is untethered to ethical consideration. This is why we have child labor laws. This is why we have unions. This is why we have antitrust laws. This is why we had Glass-Steagall. So we simply rise up as other generations have risen before, and we have proper boundaries. It's what everybody knows this in personal relationships. You have to have healthy boundaries. That's what regulations are. That's what financial regulations are. Healthy boundaries. No, you can't overreach. No, you can't take it all. Yes, there are two of us here. And so it has to do with repealing the tax cuts to the very, very richest and very richest corporations, and making sure that there are proper financial regulations. You know, let's not kid ourselves. Not one person, not one, well, I think some low-level people were prosecuted in terms of the huge financial collapse in 2018. Even under a Democratic president, we protected that system. We stopped protecting that system. And like I said, it's actually not mysterious. You put back Glass-Steagall, you put back the kind of economic regulations that make sure that people stay in their lane. And that no, you don't get the whole government. And no, we're not, but you, all of us as citizens are going to have to elect not just a president, but also senators and congresspeople who will make this happen. And we have a House of Representatives right now, because of the blue wave, this last midterm election, that's moving in that direction, but it's also going to take different makeup in the Senate. What we can't do is take our eyes off this ball. That's the thing. The people who have the most, have the most recognition of what's really going on must stop allowing ourselves to be too often preoccupied with ultimately unimportant things, and that includes brand protection. Now this has just got, you know, this is really sad. You know, people would say to me during the last midterms, well, what are you supposed to do? I get so many, I remember a friend saying, I get so many emails, what am I supposed to do, give money to everybody? And I said, yeah. Yeah, to all of them, that's what you should do. Yeah. This is like serious. This is not, the resiliency of the status quo is tremendous. What I'm seeing in my own campaign right now, I had thought, well, they'll give me 15 minutes. Well, that's okay. I can do a lot with 15 minutes.
But I didn't, boy, this is so insidious. So I had an early CNN interview that went really well. I had a big piece on ABC Nightline that was really good. I was on a big feature article, front page of the Washington Post, and I naively thought, they can't ignore me now. Yes, they can. You know, it's almost, you can feel almost like, don't let that woman in the room. And so the fact, and you know, there's stuff happening, you know, and I might be tomorrow night on, you know, there's stuff happening. I mean, keep your TVs on, there's stuff happening. But I haven't had, for instance, my CNN town hall. So we're not supposed to have gatekeepers in this country. This is not Iran, where people get to vote, but the Ayatollahs determine who your choices are. So when this gatekeeper field of media and political establishment tells you who the viable candidates are, based on what? Tell you who the long shot candidates are, based on what? You know, there's debate going on in Iowa with all the presidential candidates, but they don't have me. And somebody said, well, why isn't Marianne Williamson there? And they said, well, we decided that it was only politicians who had served in office before. Well, wait, what about the U.S. Constitution? Because the U.S. Constitution says that in order to be president, the qualifications for the presidency are that someone is 35 or older, has lived here for 14 years, and was born here. The Constitution does not say that person had to have been a congressman or a senator or a lawyer or a governor. They were leaving it, interestingly enough, they were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself. What that generation feels is the skill set most necessary to navigate the times in which we live. And I feel that the fact that I have a 35-year career navigating the kind of changes underneath the surface that have to happen in order for fundamental change and transformation to occur is the skill set I have. I mean, experienced politicians took us into Iraq. A bunch of philosophers did not do that. You know? So I think it's very interesting. And also anybody who thinks that 2 terms as a U.S. congressman is what makes you qualified enough to lead this country clearly doesn't know what congressmen do all day. It's like a joke. As far as being a lawyer is concerned, James Madison wrote the Constitution and he wasn't a lawyer. He went to Princeton and studied Hebrew and philosophy. So we have to allow ourselves to no longer be mesmerized by, I don't even remember what I was answering. Was it something, how did I get there? No, is that where I don't know how I meandered. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question from the online viewers over here. So we recently had Andrew Yang here. And
Andrew Yang?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so the viewers are wondering if, with the coming of automation, what your stance is on UBI.
I agree with Andrew. I read his book, and he and I are friends, and we did a citizen poll together, and he's absolutely correct. I read his book, The War on Normal People. The conversation that I find most compelling is a combination of UBI, Universal Basic Income, and a federal jobs guarantee. But I certainly agree with him that we've got a tsunami coming, an economic tsunami coming, that the current elite corporate establishment doesn't even recognize because it's so far from its neighborhood. And he's absolutely right that we shouldn't even be considered drastic measures. So yes, I agree. UBI in combination with federal jobs guarantee. Yes, in the back there. And he got his 65,000. I hope all of you are aware. Is everybody aware of the 65,000 unique donations issue? Is anybody not aware? Okay. So I need 65,000, all of us do, unique contributors in order to make it onto the stage of the DNC debates. And so I hope if you, regardless of whether or not you think that you would vote for me for president, if you just think that my voice should be on the debate stage, I hope you will give, even if you give $1, and ask everybody that you know, in order for us to penetrate that field of resistance that is clearly, it's kind of a modern, subtle witch burning, you know. So interesting. And I would really, really request that you help me with this, even if it's $1. Thank you. Yes, somebody in the back.
Well, that was one of my questions. Do you know where you are in terms of unique contributions?
About 33,000, so we're about halfway there. And we have until May 15th.
Just until May 15th, okay. And the other question was, since America, much of America thinks of itself as a Christian nation, and the Course in Miracles is not really the Word of God in some people's minds, have you had people question your religious, spiritual direction because you have been so involved as a teacher of something that's an alternative voice of the voice of Christ?
I have great respect for the fact that our tradition in the United States is to keep our political conversation secular. That's very important because we are a religiously pluralistic society. Whether you believe, Jefferson said, whether you believe in 20 gods or no gods, neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. Everybody should feel welcome in our political conversation, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Christian, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Hindu, whether they're Buddhist, whether they're Gnostic, whether they're atheist. And I think that my languaging displays that respect. Now, having said that, no one has criticized me because no one has heard me cross that line, nor would I. The separation of church and state is an entirely different thing altogether. The separation of church and state is one of our more enlightened principles in our Constitution. It means two things. It means that our government will not experience interference from religious institutions. So in Washington, there's no imam, rabbi, minister, priest, mufti, ayatollah, or anything like that who gets to walk into the halls of Congress and say, stop right there, you can't pass that law, we won't let you, or you have to pass this law, you must. That's not going to happen in America. But it also means that no policeman's going to come into a synagogue, a mosque, a church, a recovery meeting, a Course in Miracles group, a Wicca meeting, a pagan ritual, or anything, or a group of American atheists, and say, break it up, you're not on the list. So it's profoundly important. It protects both. It protects government from religious interference, and it protects religion or lack of religion from governmental interference. But by instituting that very important principle, the founders were not seeking to suppress the religious conversation. They were seeking to protect it and to liberate it. So the fact that I speak in spiritual terms, it was never anything that the founders were against. That's the problem with this country. JFK said that we cannot afford to be materially rich and spiritually poor. So the over-secularization of the conversation on the left, I think, among other things, has not only contributed to the disconnection of our political discourse from our own wisdom, but it has also turned off a lot of people on the right, unnecessarily, interestingly enough. Even abortion. You can talk about abortion in a moral context and simply say that it is an issue of private morality. Yes, it's a moral issue, but it's a private moral issue, and the government should have nothing to say other than the injunction against sex with children, which is universal. You can say, don't believe that the government should be telling people what to do with their bodies, what they have to do or what they can't do. It's a moral issue, but it's a private moral issue. It's not a public moral issue. You have no idea how many conservatives say, oh, okay. But as long as we hold to this, well, it's only about a woman and her body, it makes a lot of people feel we don't have any morals because we're too cool to use the word. It's stupid, among other things.
You can ramp up the calls and sending out the emails to get those 32,000.
Well, anybody who is on my site, if you've signed up, and I hope you all will, at Marianne2020.com. I think you can also get there, Marianne Williamson for President or whatever. You've been receiving emails from me, and the letter today was about the 65,000. I need those by May 15th, or I won't be able to be on the debate stage, and that would really make this hard. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Marianne Williamson. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
I've been at the third meeting with you, third event. I want to say this. I feel I'm a very spiritual person. I've been like that all my life. And I've been studying it and studying people and talking to people. And sometimes, every so often I say to somebody, you know, you're an angel. And they laugh, they hide, they make believe that they don't realize, or they do realize it. So what I like to say is this: we are angels in this room, and she needs the protection of the angelic heavenly realm. So what I'm going to do, I want to put her in my prayers every day, that the angels protect her, and I'm asking everybody here to do the same, because she needs a lot of protection. And I'm aware of it because I've been in this country, I mean, since I'm born 81 years ago, and a lot of things have happened. So what I'm saying is that keep her in your protection. Ask God's angelic realm to protect her, be around her, so that she is protected, because we need her voice, we need her strength, and we need her talents, because this country does need a lot of help, and we can help the world if we can help ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi.
I'm a member of Marble Collegiate Church, and I loved hearing you speak there. And
They were so wonderful to me. I feel such affection for all of them, and I feel deep gratitude for my time there.
Oh, I'm glad. What bothers me as much as the lack of conscience of our president is the way Congress behaves and interacts with each other. And I think that any president can have a wonderful agenda, but also needs to learn how to work with Congress. And right now I just feel like they're just so uncivil and disrespectful to each other, yet they're elected by us. So how would you start to change that so that the senators and congressmen and women can start to believe the vision that you have?
You can't change other people. You can just be the person that you feel you should be. You know, Barack Obama did try to be elegant and gracious, and look how he was treated. So, you know, you can't be responsible for how other people are going to treat you. It's like you said, people elected them. People elected them. We need to elect people who represent a different consciousness. But we also have to look at ourselves, because a smug, self-righteous, intolerant left-winger is no less dangerous to the fabric of our country than is a smug, self-righteous, intolerant right-winger. There's a lot of shutdown that comes from the left these days, too. That we all have to look at ourselves. You know, Martin Luther King said, you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. You know, we're not without our own level of arrogance, and also it's the real problem. There are high-minded conservative principles. I'm not a conservative, but there are high-minded conservative principles, and there are high-minded liberal principles. Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. The problem today is not conservatism, it's an authoritarian corporatism that is actually no more conservative than it is liberal. And I think that those forces laugh at the fact that we make it between liberal and conservative. So I've said to many people on the campaign trail, I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. I want to go to Washington and create with you. I want to do in Washington what you need to do in New York, and what you guys need to do in Iowa, and what you guys need to do in Nevada. And these forces are at work not only on all levels of our government, but inside our own hearts. But remember what I said. There are a lot more lovers than haters. But you can't transform something you won't name. You know, there's a difference between transcendence and denial. And if you just turn away from politics, you're not helping to transform it. You have to look at it and deny its power. You know, there's negative denial and positive denial. Negative denial is you just don't look and pretend like you're too spiritual. Positive denial is, oh, I see you, and I deny your power to remain while I'm here. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
There's a lot of conversations with gun laws, right, and things that are happening throughout the globe. And I can't help but look at the culture, specifically here in the West. But I mean, a child is raised with, you know, squirt guns, and then on television, it's extreme violence. Every movie, movie ads going to the subway, right? We're just it's overwhelming with violence. And then there's a conversation on just blaming it on like the gun laws. What are your thoughts about that, and do you have any other solutions?
When it comes to guns themselves, this is another example of where the consciousness of the American people is not the problem. The consciousness of the American people is such that the majority of Americans want universal background checks. The majority of Americans want to outlaw bump stocks. The majority of Americans want to have a serious conversation, at least, about the sale of military-style assault weapons to the average citizen. But this is just like the average American would like us to fight climate change. The average American would like us to have universal health care. We don't have universal health care because of the health insurance companies and the pharmaceuticals. We don't fight climate change because of fossil fuel companies. And we don't have universal background checks. And we don't have outlawed bump stocks because of the NRA, which is the lobbying organization for gun manufacturers. This is why I said before, it's one problem. It's one problem underlying these things. Once again, you're going to have to elect a Congress. You know, we got the House really moving in that kind of a direction, but you have to have the Senate as well. But also, even if we were to do all of those things, when you look at how many guns are already in people's hands, and when you look at what you said, Hollywood has some things to look at too. It's not like cool people don't have things to look at. The money that is made on video games, the money that is made on Hollywood. I mean, I remember when my daughter was really little, and she said something to me about mom. She said, "Mommy, this channel is supposed to be TV for women." We all know what it is. I said, "No." And she went, "Everybody's murdered all the time." That's TV for women. Yeah, really? Really? So, you know, it's one thing when you look at someone like a Martin Scorsese, where violence is part of the art, and you can see it. You know when you're watching a movie or TV and it's part of the art, and you also know when that murder, that gratuitous violence against women was just thrown in there, you know, to make it, you know, more compelling for a 14-year-old or whatever. And these video games, you know, once again, it's not like we don't know. We're just not acting on what we know. We know what it does to desensitize a child's brain. We need to start infusing early childhood, the development of our children's brains with compassion and love. Not all of that can be done by the government. This is a multi-dimensional. We need an integrated politics, and we need an integrative transformation. It's changes that have to happen in the culture, and it's changes that have to happen in our government. A lot of people in this room are probably in situations where you're going to make more money if you go along with something that's more violent, something that's not cool, something that's unethical. We all have to make these ethical decisions all the time. That's why I get so upset with these politicians who somebody says, well, you know, they're not coming up against Trump because they're afraid they might lose their job. Well, lose your job. Do you know what I'm saying? Who among us